Kia ora, Year 12. This is another video for you to watch on probability. This one is on a different topic than all the normal distribution stuff we've been doing. I want to look at two really important ideas that come up all the time in real life and also in the level 2 exam, and that's absolute and relative risk. So this is part one, and I've based this on the PowerPoint that I usually use in class, but I'm going to talk through it more than usual. So what do we mean in probability terms by risk? Well, absolute risk is the first idea to get your head around, and that's a probability. So when we talk about risk in maths, we don't always mean a bad thing. We might say, what is the risk of getting excellence in level 2 maths, right? It's another word for probability. And so in this table here, I've put some numbers in that are showing you probabilities for getting lung cancer among smokers and non-smokers, right? So the probability that a smoker gets lung cancer, according to this table, is 0.25. right? So that's what we call an absolute risk. And we could write that as the probability of lung cancer given that someone is a smoker. And the probability that a non-smoker gets lung cancer in this table, we can write like that, and that's equal to 0.75. So remember from, I think it was video 1, or maybe even when we were still at school, this sign here means given that, right? So this is my conditional probability idea. If I'm just looking at the smokers, what's the probability that they get lung cancer, right? If I'm just looking at the non-smokers, what's the probability that they get lung cancer? So that one, lung cancer given they're a non-smoker, that should be 0.02. That one there should be 0.75, right? So far there's nothing difficult about that at all. The only new thing I want you to get is the word risk means probability. However, we often talk about a thing called relative risk, right? And relative risk is not a probability. And this is one of the most common mistakes that students make, right? It's looking at two probabilities and linking them up. So the relative risk of getting lung cancer for smokers compared to non-smokers goes like this. The risk for those who are smokers is 0.25, and the risk for those who are not smokers is 0.02. So the relative risk is one of those probabilities divided by the other. Now, when I do this, I always try to put the bigger of the two numbers in the top because it makes the interpretation really easy. So here, the relative risk is 12.5. So that's not 12.5%, it's just a number, right? It means that the smokers are 12.5 times as likely to get lung cancer as non-smokers. So if you're watching this and you're in my class, I'd really like it if you can get that down into your books as some notes, and also copy down that table there, that bit there. Oh, that didn't work. Let me try and put that box on there again. So this is pretty important key stuff to have mastered for this topic, right? So we've got the two separate conditional probabilities, and then we take the ratio of them, right? And we get 12.5. So let's have a look now at an example where you have to work out all of those probabilities, because that's usually what happens. I just wanted to say one more time that it's easiest to interpret relative risk when it's bigger than 1, right? So we try and put the big number in the top line. So here comes the first example, right? And this is about a drug company that's trying to work on a special headache pill for Year 12s, right? So if you don't like doing maths and it gives you a headache, you're going to try out this painkiller. And so the pharmaceutical company is doing its trials, and it gives some of the students the new drug, right? So it gets ethics approval for all of this and gets on with it. So some get the new drug and others get a placebo, right? So a placebo is a pill that looks like it's a headache pill, but actually it's got no active ingredients. And then it monitors whether they get a headache. So the treatment group in here is the group that's getting the new drug, right? So that's the new drug group. And the control group are the ones who are getting the placebo. So you know from our earlier work that as soon as we see a table, we're going to start out by adding up the columns and the rows. So let's add up how many people there were who got a headache. There were 116 in total, so that's adding across. We do the same thing for no headache and we get 124. So in total, there were how many people? 240 people. And they were in two groups, 121 in this group and 119 in this group here. And I've done it like that on purpose because we don't need to have equal numbers in the two groups to compare the risks. Okay, so you can see from here what we're going to work out are some conditional probabilities. So let's have a look at these three questions. First of all, what's the absolute risk of a Year 12 getting a headache? So question 1 is simply, just fix up the stylus, sorry about that. So the first one is just the probability that a Year 12 in the group gets a headache. Right, so that's looking at all of the Year 12s. So out of the 240, how many end up with a headache? And it's 116. All right, so this number here. So we can just leave that as a fraction, or we can turn it into a decimal. Then the next one, what is the risk of a Year 12 who is taking the placebo getting a headache? So here comes our first conditional probability. All right, so we're going to write this as probability, P bracket, headache, given that they're getting the placebo. So we're restricting who we're choosing from to just those 119 students here. So it's this column here that I'm interested in. And it's 65 out of 119 of them. And that gives me 0.5462 if I go to 4 decimal places. We do the same thing now for the Year 12s who are taking the new drug. What is the risk of them getting a headache? So again, it's a conditional probability. Given that they're getting the new painkiller, what's the probability that they get a headache? So this time we're choosing from this column here. It's going to be 51 out of 121. That gives me 0.4215. Okay, so the next question is the one where the relative risk comes in. So far it's just all the same stuff we've done over and over with tables. The drug company is going to go ahead if it can show that the new drug reduces the risk of headaches. So what is the relative risk of getting headaches if a student's on the new drug compared to taking the placebo? So there are two ways to work this out. As I've said already about 3 times, I like to do this by taking the big number and putting that in the top line in the numerator. So we're going to go like this. The relative risk is equal to the probability of headache given placebo over the probability of headache given the drug. And this is not going to be a probability, it's just going to be a number that we have to interpret. So it's this, and that gives us 1.29. So what does that mean? Well, that means that people who took, that's the wrong way around. It's completely the wrong way around. That word there should say drug. No, that was the right way around. That word should say placebo. I have not made a mistake yet. Right, so we can see that the people on the placebo had a higher risk of headaches than the people on the drug. So people taking the placebo were 1.29 times as likely to get a headache as the others. So this is the page I want to go to, right? So this is how we interpret this. And I'd also like you, if you're watching from my class, to get this into your books, because that interpretation is really, really important, right? So the relative risk is 1.29, and then this sentence here explains what we mean by that. So now I'm going to quickly show you what happens if we do it the other way around and we put the little number in the top line. So here, it's just harder to explain what we're saying. So we get this 0.77 number if we do the placebo in the bottom line and the drug number in the top line. So because it's below 1, what we're saying is that the drug is reducing the risk of a headache by this much. So that number is coming from 100% minus 0.7716 times 100%. Okay, so it's much easier to do it where you're just saying straight up, it's 1.29 times as likely. So that's all I'm going to do in this video because it's already 9.5 minutes long and you've probably all stopped watching. I will give a fruit burst to anyone who is watching till the end, so just shoot me an email and I will deliver once we're back at school. There are lots of good examples of this in the Walker book and on EP, and make sure that you do practice it. I'm also going to put up some old exam questions soon, and you'll see that relative risk comes up basically every single year. Thanks for watching. Have a nice afternoon.